Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today is a very important day for those of us who are into things that have to do with Black Brazil. Today is November 20th. It is the National Day of Black Consciousness. It is a day of historical importance that's celebrated in more than 1,000 cities across Brazil. Um, I've been long fascinated with this day. In my first, travels to Brazil, most of my travels were to the state of Bahia. Anybody who's into the diaspora will have a fascination with Bahia because of its historical importance and its position as Brazil's center of Black culture. Um, Enormous Black population there. It has retained so many facets of Black culture, things that you can trace directly to the African continent. But after the first 7 years of traveling and spending most of my time in Bahia, by 2008, I had to start visiting bigger cities. I spent a lot of time in Salvador and other, smaller cities in Bahia. But with the internet at that time, I was seeing so many things that were coming out of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. That says I have to go there. I was fascinated by seeing the enormous Day of Black Consciousness marches and rallies that were, taking place in various cities, but particularly Sao Paulo. So 2008 was my first, extended stay in Sao Paulo. I have a lot of video footage from that year that I have to try and come up with, one of these days. I was still recording on those little tiny cassettes that we had back in the day. If you ever get a chance to go to Brazil and you're interested in what's going on with Black Brazil, November is just the perfect time if you want to, make that trek to Brazil, because all over the country you have all types of events. You have music, you have all types of festivals, you have all types of just expos that are selling, different products of Afro-Brazilian cultural producers, T-shirts, books, music. You could just the food. No matter where you are in the country, you're going to find some events that are going down in terms of Black culture. Somewhat similar to what you would experience with February's Black History Month in the United States. So I want to dive right into this. So, I've talked about November 20th for a number of years. And, today I just wanted to give some background as to why this is an important date. November, the entire month is celebrated as what they call Novembro Negro, which means Black November. The week of November 20th is celebrated as the week of Black consciousness. And then, it all comes down to November 20th, which is the Day of Black Consciousness in Brazil. So, without spending too much time with this introduction, I want to get directly into this date and why it's historically important, and definitely want to get a little bit into, how people recognize this date today. So today's November 20th Black Consciousness Day article is courtesy of Claudio Fernandes and Danielle Neves. This is something that I came across on it's one of the UOL websites, UOL being one of the bigger websites in Brazil. I think it's one of the educational websites. I'll definitely get to that at the end of this article. So let's definitely get straight into this piece. The National Day of Zumbi and Black Consciousness, celebrated on November 20th, was officially instituted by Law 12519 of November 10th, 2011. The date refers to the death of Zumbi dos Palmares, or Zumbi of Palmares, the then leader of the Quilombo dos Palmares, located between the states of modern-day Alagoas and Pernambuco. You see here, Pernambuco and Alagoas here. Both states located in Brazil's northeast, okay? So this says here, where was the Quilombo dos Palmares? Historic area. Quilombos are what we refer to as maroon societies, these areas, these regions where fugitive slaves would go and create their own societies. Now, there were hundreds of these in the history of Brazil. Quilombo dos Palmares is one of the biggest, if not the largest, Quilombo known in Brazilian history. Today, you still have people who live on those lands, and they are constantly at a fight with the government trying to get official recognition of their ownership of these lands. Okay, so the struggle continues today for what they call the remaining quilombos that are still active today in the country. Zumbi was killed in 1695 on November 20th by a group known as the Bandeirantes, led by Domingos Jorge Velho. There are currently a number of studies trying to reconstruct the biography of this important figure in the resistance to slavery in Brazil. Now, if you go into Brazil, you'll find this term bandeirantes in a lot of different places. You'll see freeways, there's a television station, there's radio stations named after the bandeirantes. And you look them up on Wikipedia, there's been a lot said about the bandeirantes, depending on how people interpret who these people were. But they were slavers, they were explorers, adventurers, and fortune hunters in early colonial Brazil. They are largely responsible for Brazil's great expansion westward, far beyond the Tordesillas line of 1494, which by Pope Alexander VI divided the new continent into a Western Castilian section and the Eastern Portuguese section. So you'll hear a lot about the Bandeirantes if you start digging into Brazilian history, but this is the group, whenever you hear about explorers and colonists, you hear about how dangerous they were, how violent they were, rapes, murders, taking over of lands, destroying any resistance. So this is what the Bandeirantes were known for. If you go to like the park, I forget the name of that park, Ibirapuera, I think, park in Sao Paulo, you'll find this enormous statue that's supposed to be depicting these Bandeirantes, right? So topics of this article: why November 20th, Zumbi dos Palmares, and what does Black Consciousness Day represent? So here's a nice little flyer that represents November 20th. We must have consciousness of that we are all equal, not only today, but every day, which is what that says there. So why November 20th? The date of his death, discovered by historians in the early 1970s, motivated members of the United Black Movement, Movimento Negro Unificado, against racial discrimination at a Congress held in Sao Paulo in 1978 to choose the figure of Zumbi as a symbol of the struggle and resistance of enslaved Blacks in Brazil, as well as the struggle for rights that Afro-Brazilians demand. This is a picture from the 1978 rally of the Movimento Negro. Basically the Black rights segment, an umbrella term that encompasses just probably hundreds of organizations under the Movimento Negro title. So as a result, November 20th became the date to celebrate and remember the struggle of Black people against oppression in Brazil. For this reason, the 13th of May, the date on which the abolition of slavery took place in 1888, was dismissed. The argument used is that the 13th of May represents a false freedom, since after the 1888 Golden Law, Black people were left to their own devices and were left without any kind of assistance from the public authorities to restart their lives. All of the recent conquests in our country were the result of the struggle of the Black movement, the Movimento Negro again. All of the recent achievements in our country have resulted from the struggle of the Black movement. Here's another picture from that, from the early years of the foundation of the Movimento Negro in Brazil. November 20th was chosen in the context of the decline of the military dictatorship from the late 1970s onwards and the redemocratization of the country. The weakening of the dictatorship gave strength to opposition movements and social movements such as the Black movement. Remember that Brazil was under a military dictatorship between the years of 1964 to 1985. It was a 21-year dictatorship. Some, pretty brutal, repressive stories that you'll hear from that period in history. With the redemocratization of Brazil and the promulgation of the 1988 Constitution, various segments of society, including social movements such as the Black movement, were given greater space in political discussions and decisions. The participation of these groups on the political scene produced some results, with the approval of measures designed to promote a degree of historical reparation. Among these measures, we can highlight the Law on Prejudice of Race and Color, number 7716 of January 5th, 1989, and laws such as racial quotas aimed at higher education and specifically in the area of basic education, Law number 10639 of January 2003, which instituted the compulsory teaching of Afro-Brazilian history and culture, which is what this is all about, as it was instituted in January of '03, and this is 2023. It's been 20 and going on 21 years as we close out this year and move into 2024, but it's been 20 years since this law was officially passed. These laws provide some reparation for the damage suffered by the Black population in Brazil's history. Behind these laws are initiatives to end the erasure that Black people and the history of culture of Africans have suffered in Brazil. In the case of the National Day of Zumbi and Black Consciousness, the date was created through the aforementioned Law number 12519 on November 10th, 2011, during the government of Dilma Rousseff, Brazil's first female president. This law did not make the date a national holiday, so the governments of each state and city in Brazil must choose whether or not to make it a holiday. Journalist Laurentino Gomes says that until 2018, November 20th was celebrated as a holiday in 1,047 municipalities in Brazil out of a total of 5,561 municipalities throughout the country. This is a very famous monument of Zumbi dos Palmares in the city of Rio de Janeiro. You get a chance to go to Rio, you should definitely stop by this area here. The figure of Zumbi dos Palmares is especially claimed by the Black movement as a symbol of all these achievements, so much so that the law establishing Black Consciousness Day was also the result of this claim. Zumbi's name is even suggested in the national curriculum guidelines for the education of ethnic racial relations and for the teaching of Afro-Brazilian and African history and culture as a personality to be addressed in elementary school classes as an example of the struggle of Black people in Brazil. Definitely want to point out, some years ago, this history of Zumbi dos Palmares and his wife Dandara was featured in the television series known as Dear White People. It was a series that it picked on, it got pretty popular in Brazil. I think it was called, what was it? Cara Gente Branca, I think it was called. So Zumbi dos Palmares was the historical figure who inspired the creation of Black Consciousness Day. This suggestion is guided by one of the provisions of Law number 10639 of January 2003, which states the following. The syllabus will include the study of the history of Africa and Africans, the struggle of Black people in Brazil, Black Brazilian culture, and Black people in the formation of national society, highlighting the contribution of Black people in the social, economical, and political areas relevant to the history of Brazil. But who, in fact, was Zumbi dos Palmares? This is a complex question to answer since sources and evidence about the life of this historical figure are rare. What historians do know is that Zumbi dos Palmares was one of the leaders of the largest quilombos in Brazilian history, the Quilombo dos Palmares. This is kind of like an illustration that's supposed to get an idea of what the Palmares, the Quilombo dos Palmares must have looked like, right? Some facts about Zumbi dos Palmares' life that were taken for granted decades ago are now questioned by historians due to the lack of sources and inaccurate information provided by some of the studies carried out in the past. One thing that historians have almost unanimously attested to is that Zumbi was born in the Quilombo dos Palmares. This is another very popular depiction of Zumbi. Obviously, we didn't have photographs at that time. We're talking about the 17th century where, we could have had a picture of Zumbi dos Palmares. So there's a number of very popular images that people have used to represent Zumbi. You have the paintings and you also have statues throughout Brazil dedicated to Zumbi. For decades, the version written by a journalist named Decio Freitas was consolidated, saying that Zumbi was born in Palmares, but he was kidnapped as a child and raised by a priest. As a teenager, Zumbi escaped, returned to the Quilombo, and became an important general who defended Palmares from the Bandeirantes. This version is not currently supported by historiography, as it is based on the documents that only the author of the book had access to. Numerous studies have been carried out on Zumbi, and all of them have come up against a lack of historical evidence to support some of their conclusions. Recent analysis, however, point to the way in which different versions of Zumbi were constructed in their political uses. One thing I want to point out is that there's several different versions of how historians believe Zumbi was to have died. Some people say that he was captured and had his head chopped off and put on display for others who were resisting slavery, as an example of for them to fall in line. You had other stories that said, having been chased down to a cliff, they say that Zumbi jumped to his death, right? There's other versions of the story, but those are the two most common that I've ever come across. Historian or journalist Laurencino Gomez states that the current image of Zumbi is a construction idealized from the end of the 19th century by the abolitionist movement. In this construction, Zumbi became the hero of the struggles for freedom, not only of slaves and blacks, but also of peasants, Indians, and minorities. Important to point out that even though the Quilombo dos Palmares was majority black, you had Indians and you had poor whites living in that area as well. I think it was said like somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people lived in the Quilombo dos Palmares. Again, one of the biggest, if not the biggest in history of quilombos in Brazil. It was this image that was behind all of the recent conquest of the Black movement, and it is still in force today. So what does the Black Consciousness Day represent today? In addition to the issues surrounding Zumbi and the Quilombo dos Palmares, Black Consciousness Day is a significant date because it sheds light on important issues. Racism and inequality in Brazilian society. It is a date that recalls the struggle of enslaved Africans in the past and reinforces the importance of new struggles to make our society fairer. Even today, racism is one of Brazil's biggest problems. Black Consciousness Day is important to remember that our society was constructed through slavery. Even though improvements and changes have taken place, the lack of opportunities for the Black population, the racism present in everyday details, and the attempts to erase African culture show that we still have a long ways to go. Some indicators can help us understand the problem of racism in Brazil, as numerous studies have been carried out in recent years. In a survey carried out after the 2018 elections, only 4% of the politicians elected to the legislature declared themselves to be Black. The survey indicated that among district, state, and federal deputies and senators, only 65 of 1,626 elected representatives declared themselves to be Black. So this is what this caption is pointing out. This is a story from March 30th of 2018. And it says here, why is the index of Blacks in political positions, why is it low? The index of Blacks in political positions, right? Other data shows that around 56% of the population declares themselves to be Black, meaning preto y pardo, or Black and brown. But among the richest, Blacks only represent 17.8%. On the other hand, Blacks represent 75% of the poorest, as well as accounting for the majority of prisoners in Brazil at 65%. Always have to keep pointing out that according to the Movimento Negro, they include both pretos, meaning Black, and pardos, meaning brown, in the overall Black population. Some people disagree with that. I've said that there are clearly pardos who you just cannot define as Black, but there are also pardos who you can define as Black. So in other words, I can't necessarily say 56% of the population is Black. To me, I would say it's probably would be fair to say it's somewhere between, 27 and 33%. But then again, I'm just comfortable saying that there's a sizable Black population, and we'll just probably never know just how many Black people live in Brazil because there's too many discrepancies of what people think Black means. Here's a stat that talks about the prison population in Brazil. 2 in each 3 detainees are Black. Here you have, let's see here. In 2005, this stat says 58.4% of Blacks, 58.4% of detainees in Brazilian prisons are Black. Again, what we call Black and brown. And by 2019, this number had went up to 66.7%. So a little more than 2/3 of the prison population in Brazil is said to be Black, which means Black and brown. Brazil is like the 4th or 3rd nation with the largest prison population in the world now. Furthermore, Blacks are convicted more often than whites when they are prosecuted for drug possession. However, paradoxically, they are apprehended with smaller doses of illicit substances than white convicts. Not only does justice prove to be stricter against Blacks, but so do the police, since 76% of those killed by the police in Brazil are black. I just pointed out in a story either yesterday or the day before that I think another study showed that like I think it was every 4 hours or something like that, you had a black person being killed by police in Brazil. It's an outrageous number. Again, the number of people killed by Brazil police like blow how many blacks are killed by police in the United States just blows it out of the water. A lot of people just look at it as the genocide of the black population in Brazil. Some studies point out an even higher number. Like this study here says blacks are 84% of the people killed by police in Brazil. So it just depends on what data you're looking at and what time, what particular period in the year that you might be looking at. It's also worth mentioning that in the job market, blacks also suffer from prejudice as they are paid an average of 1,200 reais less than white workers. Even in unemployment, blacks suffer more as more than 60% of the unemployed are black. Now, I do want to point out, just as we have studies and, in gender inequality, we have it in race inequality. I do believe that these numbers do have to be, further expanded because a lot of times statistics will be showing, okay, black workers make $1,200 less than white workers, but is there a comparison between, a black worker and a white worker who've been at a job at the same amount of time, have the same education standards, qualifications? What are some of the other nuances that show us as to why there's a salary difference between black workers and white workers? But this is often what's being used. And again, the point is you always have to compare apples with apples. I would leaning towards this. I would be leaning more towards the side that it's very clear that obviously black workers make less than white workers. But the question is, why is that? When we get to higher institutions of higher learning, for example, we find that black Brazilians tend to study in different majors than white and Asian students, for example. If you focus most of your academic history, what you study in higher learning, if you tend to focus on the social sciences and the other groups focus on the hard sciences, then you're going to have a definitive difference in salary, which cannot be just broken down to say, well, this is because of race, something I definitely want to acknowledge. Racism has become so ingrained in Brazilian culture that it even manifests itself in our vocabulary. Expressions such as da cor da pecado, meaning the color of sin, denegrir or denigrate, mulatto, cabelo ruim, or bad hair, to refer to what they call cabelo crespo or kinky curly hair, among many other phrases and sayings, that they have in Brazil. They clearly denote racism and have arisen from the legacy of more than 300 years of slavery in Brazil. This particular picture here was a novella, I think might have been from like 2004, starring the country's top black actress, Thais Araújo. And, the novella was called Of the Color of Skin, Of the Color of Sin, And you'll see the brown skin, the torso of apparently a black woman with brown skin. Black and brown skin is considered to be a sinful color. That's what it says, of the color of sin. This is another thing that people have complained about how images of black people are portrayed in Brazil. Then you have the idea, Americans will be familiar with, the good hair, bad hair argument, right? In Brazil, cabelo ruim means bad hair, whereas cabelo bom means good hair. So the curly kinky hair is described as cabelo ruim, and the straight hair is considered to be cabelo bom. It's the same standard wherever you go, right? The religious culture of Black Africans also suffers greatly from the prejudice in Brazil. In the 1930s, so-called African religions were banned in Brazil, the most prominent being what's called the candomblé. You look at these women here. These people had to fight for decades to have the right to be able to celebrate their religion. Candomblé is an extension of the Yoruba religion coming out of Nigeria. And I don't think this, just like race, I don't think we'll ever know how many people actually follow candomblé in Brazil, because people are so afraid of being persecuted in Brazil for following their particular religion, whether it's candomblé or it's another religion called Umbanda. If you go to the blackbraziltoday.com blog, you'll see these stories of all of these houses of worship that they call terreiros in Brazil being, targeted for violence. They've been set on fire, set ablaze. People particularly those coming out of the evangelical churches, they look at Candomblé and Umbanda as religions of the devil. They see it as devil worship, and they've given these religions all of these negative stereotypes because they're followers of Jesus, and they see, as I said, they see the Candomblé and Umbanda as like the work of the devil. So they persecute these people worshiping in these religions of Candomblé or Umbanda. They'll wear white. They'll wear white. They have their own rituals, and sometimes they'll be in their communities, and evangelical dope dealers will tell them like, look, no, you can't come here. You can't wear that clothing in this neighborhood, or we're gonna make sure you don't do that. So people won't even necessarily define themselves openly as followers of Candomblé or Umbanda because they're afraid of the repression they'll get from people who follow the evangelical religion. Today, although the Constitution provides for freedom of religion, what we see in our country is that religions of African origin are intensely persecuted. A recent phenomenon is the vandalism committed against tejeros, where Umbanda and Candomblé gatherings are practiced. There's hundreds of pictures you can find online. This woman sees, she's a Mãe do Santo in one of these tejeros, and as you can see, this was once her house of worship, and it was just totally, demolished by people who don't like her religion. This is not just, a isolated incident. Constantly you see people who follow these religions being persecuted. Some of these people have been physically attacked. There's actually a day set aside in Brazil to speak out against religious intolerance. That's a whole nother thing that I won't cover here. It's pretty sad to see, though. Even at school, there is an enormous resistance to African culture, as there are parents who refuse to allow their children to have access to knowledge about cultures of African origin. Even teachers often refuse to teach their pupils about Afro-Brazilian culture, even though there is a law obliging them to do so. So here it is 20 years after this law was passed that obligated teachers to teach Afro-Brazilian history and culture. Either teachers are not prepared to teach, or they refuse to teach, even though this has been a law that was passed by the federal government. Black Consciousness Day is the moment when we can become aware of the racism that surrounds us and take a stand for change and a fairer country. Okay. So that's what I have today for November 20th, which is today, which is the day of Black consciousness throughout Brazil. Just a short history. I can't cover in just one video everything that goes down in Brazil, the history of Brazil, but I like to do a little bit every day so that people who are not familiar with the situation of Black Brazilians can become a little bit more familiar with this. Over the last few years, there's been an enormous interest in Black Brazil. So hopefully you learned a little bit more about why this day is important in Brazil, November 20th. Again, the Dia de Consciência Negra, they say in Brazil, the day of Black consciousness. I used to love going to Brazil in November. It was always one of those times where I could just find all types of things that had something to do with the history of Black Brazilians. Definitely want to know what you thought about today's article. This is, again, the Day of Black Consciousness in Brazil. Want to know what you thought about this? One of these days, I want to go more into the history of Zumbi dos Palmares. I want to go into Ganga Zumba, another important person from that history. Want to know what you thought. Drop a comment in the comment section. Consider sharing this video. Definitely like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you've seen more than a few videos that you liked here. Click on that notification bell so that you'll receive updates when you'll be updated. You'll be one of the first people to see the videos as I post them. If you learn something from this video and you think it's something that deserves to be supported, definitely drop a tip at my my Cash App profile. That's you see the $ and Mr. Marcus 72. That's MRMARQUES 72. Just show brother some love. And with that said, I'm going to end this video here and ask that you all stop by and check out my next video when I post it.